back to a new Captain's Academy episode, and today we're going to talk about Captain's builds for the new skill tree that's come out with patch 0.6.0. But before I get into the actual builds, there's two things I want to preface this episode with, which is one, do keep in mind that with so many new skills and a lot more choice, the builds that I provide are not the be-all and end-all of builds. You are going to have to tailor your build to your preference in terms of playstyle and the role you want to play. This new skill tree is a lot more forcing sort of players to be specialized in a role than with the previous skill tree before. So do keep that in mind. I'm going to try to offer as many different kinds of builds as possible along with the roles that they might be intended for, but you can still make alterations determined based on your way of playing the game. And the second thing is, of course, that I'm going to be talking mostly about tier 10 ships, and I'm going to be using mostly 19-point captains, because what the point is to show you sort of, if you are leveling a captain, this is what you want at the end, right? That's the thing you want to accomplish at the end when you finally get to tier 10 and max point captains. However, I will be going down to lower tier ships on occasion to talk about those particular ships as well, and sort of skills that are important for them, although I'm not going to be doing it as much because trying to cover every ship in the game is pretty much impossible. And in a lot of cases, the ships at the end are the ones that are in a way going to sort of define the way the other ships in the line are, with some exceptions, and with those exceptions I'll deviate and go off to some other tier ships. Because this video ended up being quite a bit longer than I initially planned, I've actually put up a table of contents about where all the ships sort of appear in this video, and you can sort of just either click on the annotations, or you can just scroll forward to the time, or check the video description for all the timestamps as well. Alright, so we're going to start with the Shimakaze, and let's take a look at the Shimakaze and the skills that fit this particular ship. So do keep in mind that as a Shimakaze, there is both a very torpedo-heavy style of play. There's also, throwing in some guns as well. And those all sort of lead to different types of skill choices. So you do have to keep that in mind when you're deciding to pick your skills. And this is for pretty much all ships, that there's different styles of play and therefore different skill builds. Now, for destroyers, and that is pretty much all destroyers, the first row offers very, very limited skills. So that's kind of unfortunate. And pretty much the only thing you're really going to be picking is preventative maintenance, as this reduces the chance of your rudder, your engine, your weapons, your torpedoes from getting knocked out. So that's pretty much the universal pick on the first row with your first point. That's because everything else is kind of meh. I mean, a whole bunch of airplane skills that don't affect you, a catapult skill, a catapult fighter skill that doesn't affect you either. You could get priority target, but again, as a destroyer, it's like most times you're pretty much stealthed up, and then when finally somebody does actually lock onto you, and let's say you are spotted and people start shooting at you, you kind of get a sense of how many people are actually shooting at you just from how many shells are actually flying towards you. So not as useful as preventative maintenance on the first row. The second row is where things start to get a little bit interesting, and this is where you begin to have some choices. Now, obviously, the very first time you go through the tech tree, you're probably going to grab last stand. Again, this is pretty much universal for all of your destroyers. If your engine gets knocked out, if your rudder gets knocked out, as a destroyer you become a bit of a sitting duck, and so you really want to get last stand to keep you alive. But I'll get to some of the other skills in a second, but if you're picking a destroyer first way through, this is going to be pretty much a guaranteed second row skill. So I'm going to grab that. Alright, now we get to the third row. And the third row is where you start to have some, let's just say, diversification, depending on what kind of role you want to play. Let's say you only want to play as a torpedo boat. If that's all you care about, and you really shouldn't be playing as a pure torpedo boat, because generally speaking, with most destroyers, you're going to also want to use your guns as well, even as a Japanese destroyer. But let's say, torpedo boat's the only thing you want to do, you'd probably offer something like torpedo armament expertise. And so that's probably what you would pick. If you were, let's say, deciding to play as a gunboat, then you have some other options. You have things like basic firing training, you have things like demo expert, see, then you've got some other selections. If you want utility, let's say you really care about mostly supporting your team, you might want to consider something like superintendent, right? The extra smoke charges might be really helpful for your team. So there's a lot of choices. But let's say in the first time around, I want to play my Shimakaze as purely a torpedo boat. So I will pick torpedo armament expertise. And then, of course, the fourth row, a whole bunch of choices here as well. Although, as a destroyer, especially as a Japanese destroyer that really needs stealth, you probably want to opt for concealment expert. So your first 10 points, there it is, right? Then now you've got an additional 9 points to really pick the exact type of thing you want to do with your ship. All right, let's say you want to be a torpedo boat with an anti-ambush approach. You don't want to be easily ambushed by other ships, in particular maybe other destroyers. Well, then something like radiolocation could be quite useful in that particular situation. You can use this to either avoid ambushes or maybe even to throw torpedoes into smoke against the destroyer that might be smoking up. So radiolocation could be a pretty important skill there for you. And then, of course, you've got now only 5 points left out of your 19. Right? So you can either pick one more 4-point skill, but if you do, you limit your ability to pick any of the 2 or 3-point skills. If you pick a 3-point skill, you're limited to either a 2-point skill or 2 1-point skills. And since there's not really much on the 1-point skills, you really don't want to pick a 4 and then end up with only a 1, right? So again, as a pure torpedo boat, and let's say that's the only thing I care about, let's say I decide that what I want to do on a Shimakaze is have some utility to help my team. So maybe I'll offer something like superintendent, and then maybe I potentially want faster torpedo reloading, let's say hypothetically. So in that kind of scenario, I could pick superintendent or adrenaline rush. What if I'm worried that I might get surprised in my Shimakaze, because let's say I'm playing a little bit closer to the enemy team and they are likely to get shots in on me, and I'm worried that I might die too early? Well, in that case, maybe survivability expert and then get adrenaline rush, right? Although, do keep in mind that with a little bit more HP, it's going to take a little bit longer, percentage-wise, in terms of getting adrenaline rush to get up to the place that you wanted to. And that's because, again, the more HP you lose, the faster your reload time becomes for your main weapons and your torpedoes. So that's, let's say, playing as a primary torpedo boat with, let's say, an anti-ambush, anti-ambush strategy. You don't want to get ambushed. There we go. That's the proper word. But if I'm playing, let's say, a Shimakaze, and let's say I want to be, let's say, half and half, right? So half with torpedoes, half with guns, and I don't really care about, let's say, enemy destroyers as much in terms of getting ambushed, because let's say, they pick me up with RDF or something, and I'm ready to fight them, and I'm actually willing to go and pick that fight, and let's say turn tables on a destroyer that's hunting, then I can offer a different skill build. And by the way, when you reset your skills, you can do it with doubloons, or you can do it with elite commander experience. So there is another thing that you might have missed, so just keep that in mind. But obviously I'm just going to reset with doubloons because it's only 14 right now. And yes, I'm on the press account, I know. But anyways, okay, so let's say I wanted to opt for a style of play on the Shimakaze where I'm both effective with torpedoes, but at the same time I'm ready to fight with my guns. And let's say that is the kind of situation I want to go into. And you'll see that the build kind of changes, right? Still preventative maintenance on 1, obviously. Still last stand on 2 on the first time around. That's still the same. But instead of maybe torpedoes, maybe this time I go basic firing training. On 3, I go concealment expert on 4, just to continue to have that good stealth. And then with the remaining points that I have, the remaining 9 points, I opt for things like adrenaline rush. I opt for something like survivability expert, right? Because if I'm going to get into a gunfight, I better make sure I have these things, right? And then maybe what's going to happen is I'll get something like torpedo armament expertise, right? Just so that my torpedoes are still workable, right? I still have the ability to use my torpedoes. And so again, if you look at the synergy here, gun synergizes well, torpedo synergizes well with adrenaline rush. So I'm getting a decent amount of points into a decent build for fighting other destroyers if I have to. But again, see, in this particular case, I can't really get radiolocation. And instead, now I'm going to have to almost look at the locator icon pop up, look at the mini-map, try to judge where that RDF, RPF ship is, and then try to turn the tables on them when they pop out. And instead, maybe take them by surprise. A lot of gunboats, when they're hunting an IJ and DD, they don't really think you're going to turn around and fight them, right? So that could be something. But unfortunately, I don't have enough skills points to take something like expert marksman. So again, you have to plan ahead with your guns a little bit more. Maybe make sure that they're in the right direction based on your own kind of prediction of where the ship might be based on the minimap. So with the remaining skill point, I might have to opt for something like priority target. So that would be a 19-point build for something that wants to both have viable guns and torpedoes. But what if I don't really want to fight enemy destroyers, or let's say I ideally want to avoid the fight with enemy destroyers, and let's say I want to be able to harass battleships more? Well, then that's a different thing as well, right? So again, preventive maintenance, that's all the same, right? Last stand, that's all the same. Okay, but this time I want to harass battleships more. I want to set them on fire a little bit more. I want to be annoying to them, right? Along with torpedoes, but I also want to add the guns in. Okay, so this time maybe I'll offer something like, first of all, I'll offer torpedo armored expertise. Still want to have those torpedoes for harassing battleships, obviously. Concealment, that's important. But okay, this time I want to have more range. So I get advanced firing training, because Shimakaze's guns without AFT is not that good, right? With AFT, I'm going to have some stealth firing. I'm going to have some torpedo abilities. And okay, now take a look at the number of points I have left. I've got 5 points left. Again, I can offer the basic firing training adrenaline rush combination, right? So this will give me something. But then I'm going to give up on survivability expert. So am I going to be trying to pick fights with destroyers up close? Probably not, right? Because lack of HP is not that good when you run into destroyers that have like 20,000 HP or more, if in the case of the Khabarovsk. So maybe offer this. Maybe I want to offer just basic firing training and maybe get demo expert. I want to increase the amount of chances I get to set fires. So the Shimakaze, as you can tell, just this one ship alone had this many different kinds of builds based on your objectives, your playstyle, and what you want to do. There's no universal skill that I would say, yes, you have to take this in every single build. There are other things you can give up, right? And I didn't even talk about support builds. Like, what if your goal is to provide support for your team, provide, let's say, smoke support, and at the same time provide vision support? Well, in that kind of scenario, think about what might change, right? All of a sudden, I might want to go preventative maintenance. Maybe I want to go with last stand, right? And maybe last stand in this build, if I'm not being spotted all the time and just providing smoke support and spotting, maybe last stand isn't even all that super important. But again, that, I digress. But let's say I take last stand. But now maybe I want to get something else, right? Maybe I want to have additional smoke charges. Maybe I want to have additional speed boost charges to zip around the map. Okay, so maybe I take superintendent. Maybe I take concealment expert to continue helping my team spotting with, spotting things. Take radio location. Maybe, indicate to my team where the nearest enemy ship is. But again, by taking this, I am going to limit myself in terms of offensive capabilities, right? Do I want to go with torpedoes? Do I want to go with guns? What do I want to go with? What if I want to lay bigger smoke clouds, right? So if I take smokescreen expert, that's 2 points. I'm down to 3 points left. I'm going to pick either torpedoes, which, again, one of my major armaments, so maybe I'll take that to support my team. And maybe even when I'm taking torpedo armament expertise, I have to decide what kind of torpedoes I want to take if I'm playing a support role. Do I want to take F3s? Do I want to take the 12-kilometer torps? Or do I want to take the 20-kilometer torps, which are not good for ninja assassins, but they're pretty good at still zoning out areas? If as a support destroyer, the role I play will be different. Now, the reason I'm talking about a support role like this, hypothetically speaking, is mostly to address something like, what if one day you have competitive play, where it's tier 10 ships, right? And hypothetically, that's what you're dealing with. And again, I'm not sure what the evolution of this meta will be, but, maybe destroyer's role wouldn't be so much just hunting other DDs. Maybe there's more of that team support role, and the whole teams are now being used to push a cap, and you need to support them with whatever you've got, right? Again, something like smokescreen expert, giving that bigger smoke cloud could be quite useful. Although again, this might be more of a USDD thing. I'm just sort of putting this out there to show you that there are even sort of builds that are not just focused on damage, right? Okay, so that's just the Shimakaze. So this is why I said this is going to be a bit of a long video, and it's not going to be allowing me to sort of cover every single ship that's out there. Okay, so gearing, for example. Now here's another ship that's quite different from the Shimakaze, as the gearing is much more sort of gun-focused, with that half on torpedoes. But remember, gearing can also make a pretty potent destroyer hunter, right? So think about that for a second. So as a destroyer, again, preventive maintenance, last stand, these are sort of like the default first 2 skills that you get. All right, but once you get past that as a gearing, think about what might entice you now on this 3rd row. Do you want to go survivability expert first, which is that's quite viable if you're getting up close and you're dueling it out with people. You might want to offer basic firing training, just faster rate of fire, pump out more shells faster. So that could be an option. Or maybe you want to just have faster torpedo reload, right? Let's say you like your guns, but you think that your guns are okay, maybe you can offer torpedoes. But let's say it's me and I say, all right, I want faster firing guns because I want to shoot pew pew things a little faster. All right, so I go basic firing training and then go concealment expert, as I still need to be quite darn stealthy to really hunt other destroyers. Okay, got 9 points left. Maybe as a destroyer hunter, radio location is going to be important for me, so I get radio location. And maybe in this situation, I want to have more HP, because I am going to get up close and personal. I'm going to duel with them, so I'll get survivability expert. And then let's say I get adrenaline rush. So there we go. I've got a nice synergization there in terms of having the HP and also having a good amount of rate of fire that increases as I lose HP, and I have the skills to hunt destroyers. But in a way here, you'll see that my torpedo reload doesn't happen, so I don't get the fast torpedo reloads. I don't get additional charges of smoke or anything like that. I don't get demo expert, so my utility against larger capital ships, maybe battleships, decreases a little bit. Right? All right. So what if I'm in a situation with a gearing and I want to be more effective against larger ships? I want to play as a harassing role against cruisers, and I want to play a harassing role against battleships. Okay, so then changes again, right? Not the first two skills. These two just never change. But down here, again, very different, right? Maybe this time I go basic firing training. Maybe I go concealment. I could go advanced firing training for a bit more range, right? So pack that all together. And this time I want to get additional harass capabilities against an enemy ship. So here I could opt for torpedo armament expertise. I could opt for adrenaline rush. So there we go. There's my gun harassing build, right? If I'm going to do that in a gearing. Let's change this up some more, because there's a lot of changes and a lot of different things that you can think of. Preventive maintenance could go. You can go last stand. Let's say you want to be more effective against cruisers, especially cruisers that might try to bow in and chase you down. Okay, in that kind of scenario, let's say you go, and let's say you want to go torpedo armament maybe, or you could go basic fire and training. That's kind of your choice here. Or maybe because you're going to be shooting at cruisers a little bit, mind you, that's not a good idea, but hey, who knows? Some people, they want to be a little bit more effective against cruisers. They may be thinking about something different. So maybe in that kind of situation, you go torpedo armament expertise. Maybe you go inertia fuse for HE shells. So this is a skill that's quite interesting. So IFHE, this is a skill that, okay, and you have to sort of understand the math behind this skill. So to calculate whether or not this skill is going to be useful, here's what you first do. Everything except for German battleship main guns, the penetration of your HE shell is 1/6 the size of your shell. So in the event of 127 millimeter shells, the normal HE pen is like 21 millimeters, which if you look at, let's say, tier 8, 9, 10 cruiser bow armor, it's thicker than that. So if you shoot at the bow of those particular cruisers, you're not going to do anything except for getting the occasional fire, but you're not going to do any HE pen damage. But if you get IFHE, you multiply whatever that penetration value was, and you multiply by 1.3. And once you do that, for something like a gearing with 127 millimeter guns, your penetration with your high explosive goes up to 28 if they round up, but it's actually 27.5, but if they round it up, it's 28, which is going to be enough to penetrate the bows of high-tier cruisers. So if you get that, and a cruiser tries to rush you, bow on, you can actually get HE pen damage on them. But of course, this is at the cost of 3% of your fire chance, which, as a destroyer like the gearing, where your fire chance is pretty low, give up 3% and you basically have like nothing, so you pretty much have to take something like Demo Expert to counteract that. In most cases, I would say that high-tier destroyers really are not going to be taking IFHE. I think a lot more utility could be found for the skill if you're between sort of destroyers between tiers 5 and 7, because that's where you're running into battleships who still have maximum like 25 millimeter bows, and you can hit them there and do damage. But still, I mean, this could be a build, right? And of course, you get Concealment Expert, and once you do that, you're down to 2 points. So out of 2 points, what do you want, right? Maybe you want to even get Torpedo Acceleration, because gearing torpedoes have decent range, so you can give up some of that range for some more speed. That could be something to do on a gearing. Maybe you want faster reload for your guns, because you're going to be shooting at people. Maybe Adrenaline Rush, right? And again, you can also trade away something like Torpedo Armament Expertise for basic firing training and get just more pew-pew, right? That is viable. But once again, many different builds. And again, you have to ask yourself that very, very important question. How do I play? What's my play style? And what do I want to optimize my ship for? Right? I've shown you that if you wanted to go torpedo heavy, you do this. If you want to go gun heavy, you do this. If you want utility, you do something like this. If you want to, let's say, hunt enemy DDs, you do this. You want greater effect against larger ships, you do this. All different decisions for you to make. This skill tree is really about specializing. All right, let's move on to something like the Cob. See, Cob is going to be an interesting destroyer because if you think about the Cob, not a really stealthy destroyer by any stretch of the imagination. The Cob is more of a harassment destroyer. It's like, kind of stay a little bit further away and you harass the hell out of larger ships and you annoy the crap out of them. So if you're playing a Cob, because remember, if you get into a true close range fight against things like the Gearing, might not end up so well for you in a Cob, especially if that Gearing knows what he's doing. So as a Khabarovsk, what do? Right? So similar build initially, preventive maintenance, last stand. Yes, I mean, this is kind of the same thing all the way through. But as the Khabarovsk, think about your role. You're going to be a harassing destroyer from range. So you want to be able to shoot a lot of stuff, not die easily, and be a pain in the ass. So here you go. You want to go with something like Demo Expert, because extra fire chance is great. You want Survivability Expert, because you're more trying to be, let's say, like a light cruiser rather than a destroyer. You're essentially like a hyper light cruiser with no citadels. You can opt for Advanced Firing Training. That gives you more range. And once you take all these skills, look at what you're down to. You're down to 6 points. So 6 points, your final 6 points, you have a couple of interesting selections. You can go with Concealment Expert, just so that you can get, let's say, that little bit closer to an enemy destroyer. This is more like a little bit of utility here. Like, let's say there is an enemy destroyer and you're trying to chase them down. Maybe this is what you get. Maybe you get radio location finding if you want to know where the closest enemy ship is, right? So maybe that can help you as well avoid certain ambushes. Maybe that could be a thing. Maybe you want to spend it on 2 3-point skills, right? Or maybe a 3-point skill and a 2-point skill. Again, you can go basic firing training. You can go adrenaline rush. Right, you can go a 4-point skill. You can also do 4-point skill and a 2-point skill. So maybe what you do is like radio location finding and adrenaline rush, or concealment and adrenaline rush. See, Cob has many, in a way, many different sort of builds that again you tailor to what you prefer. Actually, now that I think about it, I also sort of missed another thing as well. Let's say we go back to the U.S. destroyers for a second. See, I'm not even done with the U.S. destroyer, and think about utility builds that might be useful in competitive formats, maybe. I mean, what if you were in a Gearing and you decided that what you were going to do is provide smoke support, but instead of being gun focused, you're torpedo focused, but you also want to provide AA. See? What if you want to be that small defensive fire equipped AA destroyer? And the Gearing can do it now, mind you. I mean, let's say you go last stand, right? And so what you go for is now things like basic firing training, right? You go for something like manual AA. You go for something like concealment, and then you slap on something like AFT. So now you essentially become an AA destroyer. And the Gearing can do this. And it can be quite annoying if you combine all of this with defensive fire, and your small thing that, you know, CVs are going to struggle with, and there you go, you're popping off their planes. Could that be something? Right? Could this Gearing be used in a way to form as sort of essentially like an AA picket ship that you are a little bit further away and you're taking down airplanes, preventing them from freely spotting things for a team? Or what if the Gearing serves as the escort destroyer for other destroyers, as a way that when CVs come to scout, let's say, your little group of destroyers, you're picking their planes apart with your AA? In that kind of scenario, I mean, the only way for your little task group to be spotted might be another destroyer coming to deal with you. Again, these are just ideas, right? These are just ideas. You're probably not going to pick something like this for randoms, but it could be quite interesting in a competitive environment. All right, so moving on from the Khabarovsk and the Gearing, which I've been talking about for a little bit too long, what about something like the Z52? So think about the Z52 for a minute, and it's kind of like in between a Gearing and a Cob almost in terms of how she is as a ship. So something like this, you can go preventive maintenance, last stand. And then with the German destroyers, you could go torpedo armament expertise, actually, considering the German destroyers do have pretty fast reloading torpedoes, and if you get them even faster, why not? You can spam a lot of torpedoes. You can go with concealment expert if you're wanting to go more torpedoes. See, here's another thing. German destroyers are not stealthy when they open up with their guns. They're quite okay if you just want to use torpedoes, so you could go concealment expert with torps. But maybe with guns, it's not so important. So maybe with guns, you can offer things like radiolocation or AFT. Options, right? Again, options. Let's say I don't care about being spotted in my German destroyer. I really don't care, but I want to be able to torpedo the crap out of things and also spam them full of HE shells. So what could I do? I could go advanced firing training. I could go basic firing training. I can choose demo expert maybe for additional fires, so why not? Let's say I go that, and maybe I want additional HP, so bam, go survivability expert. Alright, so now I've got a decent harass from range destroyer, decent rate of fire, decent torpedo reload, yay, maybe set a few more fires, and reasonably tanky for DD. That could be a build. But is this the only one? Of course not. I mean, I could opt for something completely different as well. I could opt for preventive maintenance. I can go last stand, and maybe this time I don't care so much about torpedoes, right? Torpedoes are kind of a good side thing, but I want maybe additional gun performance. So maybe this time I go adrenaline rush, right? I go basic firing training, still go advanced firing training, and decisions. Maybe I go survivability expert and I go radiolocation finding. So pure guns, not really worried about my torpedoes. Pure guns, survivability, and the ability to track other destroyers and avoid getting ambushed by something, and maybe have the ability to ambush something else back in return. So another potential build. A lot of builds, a lot of things that you yourself have to consider based on your own playstyle, right? That's really key. Alright, so let's move on to the cruisers. And let's start off with the Zao. And by the way, with cruisers, there's still the light cruisers that I got to talk about. So I will sort of be deviating away from tier 10 in a little bit to talk about those particular ships as well. Alright, so with the Zao, and Zao, you have a little bit more choice on the first row compared to the destroyers, so that's good. You can take something like Direction Center for catapult aircraft, so that launches 2 scout fighters and they circle around you, making for some pretty kick-ass early torpedo warning, so you could definitely opt for something like this. You could also opt for something like priority target. So as a cruiser, it's kind of important to know when people are targeting you so you can decide if you want to turn away or whatnot. So you could definitely opt for something like priority target as well. The second row for cruisers, is for something like the Zao, which doesn't have the world's fastest turret traverse, you could offer something like expert marksman, which is perfectly viable. Or you can offer something like adrenaline rush. Let's say, you know, as you keep fighting and fighting and fighting, you start to lose a little bit more HP over time. You could definitely offer something like adrenaline rush. Makes your Zao spam out shells even faster. Why the heck not? Right, so that's a choice there. I would say personally I would prefer expert marksman. I don't really like super slow turrets when I'm in a cruiser, so I would opt for that. And again, we're going to go through the first pass first and then talk about skills we'll get after. In the third row, couple of choices. Again, the cruiser builds, I think, in terms of variability, might be a little bit less just because they're more sort of specialized in maybe 1 or 2 tasks rather than potentially lots more. But again, that's debatable, and you know, maybe you guys will discover more builds out there. But for Zao in the third row, options are, well, basic firing training, superintendent, demo. Yeah, Zao already has some pretty high fire chance, so maybe demo expert's not super needed. Or maybe you're like, ah, heck with it, I'll grab demo expert just to get additional chances for fires. It's really up to you. I mean, I would just still go with demo expert because every bit I think helps, so why the heck not? And then, of course, the fourth row, Zao, right now, as most of you are aware, is really about stealth, being able to fire from that stealth and being able to harass the hell out of people with your fires and your HE damage. So concealment expert is probably going to be your thing. Alright, so that's your first 10 points gone. You got 9 points left, what do you do? And there's some decent choices here, I would say. Not as varied as the destroyer, as I mentioned earlier, but a little bit more choices here. So you could go with potentially getting adrenaline rush, like I said earlier. More shells is better. So 7 points left. You could get something like basic firing training. You could get superintendent if you want those extra heal charges. But let's say you go basic firing training for additional AA, because maybe that's something that you feel like you don't really want to deal with in a Zell, is planes coming over and bombing you. So maybe you can go basic firing training, and then you can get something like manual fire control for AA, and that makes those large caliber AA guns quite strong. You could opt for basic firing training, maybe advanced firing training. That could be a choice. You could always opt for something like superintendent and manual fire control for AA armament. Talking about something like inertia fuse for HE shells, I'll just call it IFHE, it makes it easier. If you're getting something like IFHE, unfortunately on something like the Zao, it's really not that useful, just because of the nature of the 203mm shells. And there's good reason for that, because with 203mm shells, right, if you divide it by 6, you have 33mm of HE pen, or just 34, almost, well, if you round it up, 34. And that already means you'll go through the bow armor of high-tier battleships. And so if you get IFHE, the only additional benefit for getting that skill is the ability to penetrate sort of upper belt armor on US battleships. If you take a look at like the US battleships, their upper belt armor is... Whoa, wait. Haha, it's not showing to me. Here we go. Upper belt armor on the US battleships, there's 38 there, right? So that could help against US battleships, but against something like the Yamato... Okay, I mean, upper belt armor, you already go through it anyways without IFHE, so not that useful. If you're talking about something like the Kurfürst, its upper belt armor is actually really thick, so you're not going through that pretty much anyways, and the bow area here, you'll go through that pretty much regardless. So a little bit more limited utility, but again, if it's something that you're okay with and that's something you want, that is something you could opt for. I mean, against cruisers, there's really not much point, because, you know, it's either main belt armor that you won't go through anyways, or bow armor, which you'll go through anyways. So, yeah, it can work in limited situations, but not as useful as for ships with the smaller caliber guns, which I'll get to in a minute. So yeah, a couple of choices there for you on the Zal, and again, tailor it more to the style of play that you prefer. And then next up, we've got to talk about the Des Moines, which is quite a bit different from the Zao, again, in terms of how you play. Another thing that you got to think about as well, and this is something I didn't really get into earlier, is that you also have to consider sort of what modules you have equipped, right? So for the Des Moines, for example, you have a closer range, more rapid fire build. You also have the more longer range, hide behind islands and spam HE into stuff from longer range. So 2 different playstyles for the Des Moines as well, right? And then there's also, do you want to be better against larger ships, or do you want to be better against destroyers? That sort of changes how you build as well. So let's sort of go to my default playstyle for the Des Moines, which is a bit more hide behind islands and sling HE from range and burn stuff to death. And so in that particular kind of situation, my build might be a bit different. And then let's say if I want to be up close and engaging things in a up close kind of fight. Still, I mean, as I'm getting into position, as maybe I'm trying to get into a better position, like getting behind certain islands during that in-between transit phase, maybe I want to be notified if people are shooting at me, so I will pick priority target. Once I'm past that, might want to get something like Adrenaline Rush. For me, while Expert Marksman can be useful, let's say, up close, maybe if I'm hiding behind islands, not so useful, so maybe Adrenaline Rush, so that the few times I get HP chipped away from me, I can get slightly faster rate of fire and spam out shells that much faster. Des Moines already fast enough, but hey, extra little bit doesn't hurt. So Adrenaline Rush. Alright, once past that, maybe I want to opt for ever more fires. Maybe I will go Demo Expert. Although here, again, think about the skills that you have access to. You've got access to Superintendent, more charges of defensive fire, radar, heals, right? Maybe that's your thing. Maybe you want to go basic firing training. Hey, more power to your AA guns. Me, Demo Expert, again, more fires, yay. And then, of course, on the last row here, I'll start with Concealment Expert because I want to be able to sneak around and get into positions better. Okay, so first 10 points down, got 9 points remaining. What do I get? Well, I could always say stay at range and keep myself relatively safe from aircraft, so I could go for an AA build. So I could get something like Advanced Firing Training, and of course get something like Basic Firing Training. So yay to buff the AA like crazy, and maybe I would take another 2-pointer skill. So potentially I'll take something like Jack of all trades. Maybe I'll take something like expert marksman. Right? Those are sort of choices, but it's a little bit more flexible here. What if I wanted to be into a more sort of close-up fight kind of thing, right? I want to get in close. I want to fight people up close. Oh, and by the way, preventive maintenance is also perfectly viable for a hide behind islands build as well, or just poking around corners build. Maybe you want to have this to prevent your turrets from getting knocked out when you decide to poke around a little bit from behind an island, right? So that's something. So maybe if I'm up close and engaging people, that's what I want to do. I want preventive maintenance because I want my forward guns when I'm charging people down not to get knocked out so easily. So maybe I'll get that. Maybe I want expert marksman because maybe I'm packing the rate of fire reload module. Maybe I also want to get something like adrenaline rush, right? So as I close people down and my HP gets chipped away, my rate of fire gets ever faster. So maybe that's what I'll do. I'll go for adrenaline rush. And in this particular situation, maybe something like superintendent, maybe not as useful. Again, you know, maybe that's what you prefer, maybe not. So here you have a couple of choices, right? You can either get a little bit more HP, not super useful, but hey, you could recover a little bit more. So maybe that's something. Maybe you go demo expert, maybe you go basic firing training for additional power to A, or maybe you go superintendent. Really up to you. There's like choices galore here. But that again depends on your style of play and the issues that you might run into, you know, satisfying your style of play. So let's say for me, I still prefer having demo expert. Just having that extra chance of setting fires is the thing that keeps me happy, let's say. And then, of course, because I want to get into range, you know, again, concealment expert, big deal. All right, so there we go. That's my first 12 points gone. I've got 7 points remaining. Now, up close, there's a chance that I might run into destroyers a little bit more, so maybe I take radio location finding, and that combined with radar can be really, really useful. So with my 3 remaining points, choices here. Are there a few choices now here? Let's say with my 3 remaining choices, I still decide to go superintendent because I just want that extra heal charge and maybe the extra charge of either radar, hydro, or defensive fire, depending, right? So there we go. That's one build. So yeah, I mean, as you can tell, a lot of times the builds are just you tailoring things to fit your needs. And then, of course, also you have to consider, by the way, and this is something I didn't really mention earlier when I was talking about destroyers, also think about how builds would look like if you are also having division mates. Let's say they pick a ship that's different from yours, they have certain weaknesses. Can you have skills that will counteract their weaknesses? And maybe they'll pick a skill that helps you out. So imagine 2 destroyers together, one picks RDF, the other one doesn't. Could that change the dynamic of how you interact with enemy ships? Of course it will, right? So think about that as well. Moving on, and now we're going to talk about the Moskva, but before I do that, there's something else I also want to mention as well. It's like, always think about this as well, right? If you're playing in ideal situations where, you know, you've got all of your premium consumables, you've got all the flags and everything, and you're running with that, you might be picking skills one way. Don't forget there are also people out there who don't have the credits to be playing with premium consumables all the time. And they have to use the free ones. And the reason why I bring this up is because recently I was playing on an alt account to get it ready to make a clan, not realizing that you can make a clan with like a level 1 account. I was like, okay, you know, there's all these things I've got to play to level up my account, and I had to start playing, and all of a sudden I was playing with the free consumables, and it was like, oh man, I only have 2 charges of heal or 2 charges of smoke, and suddenly certain skills became a lot more important. So do keep that in mind as well, where, you know, yes, there might be builds that are great if you already have all the things that you want on your ship, and then there are potentially people who don't have that luxury, and they might have to be playing with other builds as well. So again, see, that changes things for certain players as well. But again, obviously I'm going to try to stick with as optimal of builds as possible, trying to keep everything else controlled. So now the Moskva's sort of actual skill builds, and there's a couple, I would say. I mean, on the first row alone, you've got some choices here. I mean, you can go preventive maintenance if you are a Moskva that likes to bow tank and you want your forward guns to not get knocked out frequently. Preventive maintenance might be a thing. If you're a little bit more mobile, you want to move around and pew-pew stuff, maybe priority target is your thing. So, you know, people, when they lock onto you to start shooting at you, maybe you want to have a little bit of warning of that. I'm going to say let's go preventive maintenance, because let's say I want to play more of a bow-on tanking Moskva, which I've seen quite a bit. So let's say that's what you go with on the first row. Second row, on the first pass through, you might want to get expert marksman. Again, now see, again, there's sort of choices here. If you go expert marksman, you're dealing more with priority target in the first slot. Like you're more the mobile Moskva that's moving around and shooting people. You might want to go for expert marksman. Turrets just take a really, really long turn to traverse for a cruiser, that is, on the Moskva. Not as bad as Mogami 155, but, you know, still pretty slow. So you could offer something like that. Or you could get something like Adrenaline Rush, if you are bow tanking, which is what preventive maintenance for. So as you lose more and more of your HP, you're going to be able to shoot faster and faster and faster. So that could be a build for the bow on Moskva. Now maybe you are sort of, say, let's say sitting more at range, you're shooting more, so something like Demo Expert could be helpful. You know, your fire chance is good, but every little bit more kind of helps as well. So you can offer that, again, if you are a bow on, and that's kind of your playstyle for the Moskva. And then finally, let's say you get something like Advanced Firing Training, because, you know, let's say you are sitting at range and you're being a pest, maybe a CV doesn't like you there, decides to come for you, especially also because you're sort of hanging back a little bit more. You're more isolated and by yourself, might make for an easy target for a CV. Maybe the CV will come after you. So maybe AFT would be your thing. So now that you've got that, you've got 9 more points left. Now what do you go for now? So perhaps in a situation like that, you might want to also have a bit more skills that help you with survival. Maybe you want your consumables to cool down a bit faster, especially something like your heal. So maybe you want to heal more, so that could be another thing, right? Get Superintendent, get something like Jack of all trades, right? To just get that cooldown timer, the reload time for the consumables down. So that's something you can go for. And with the 4 remaining points, you've got some choices. You've actually got some choices. You can go Expert Marksman or High Alert, right? That helps. You can do that if you want. So you can go with that and that. So that's a 19-point build. Or let's say you want a more mobile build, right? So you've gone with Priority Target. You've gone with Expert Marksman. And you're a little bit more mobile, and you're kind of going around, and maybe because you're in a huge ship, you want some early warning against torpedoes, right? So get vigilance, and perhaps here, maybe a combination of concealment expert along with the concealment module. Those two. It's not perfect. I don't think I have that equipped. Let me just do that right now. Concealment system. Here we go. I mean, it's not perfect, but you do get your concealment down to something like 13.8, which isn't terrible. But it's okay. So maybe that would be your thing. You could do that for your first 10 points. And then with your remaining points, you could offer things like, you might want to offer advanced firing training, again, to just increase the range of your AA guns, to make sure that CVs, when they do decide to come after you, you're not the juiciest target there for them. And with the 5 remaining points, you can get either a 3-pointer and a 2-pointer. So perhaps maybe like Superintendent plus Jack of all trades could be your combination there, right? So a little bit more mobile, ability to keep yourself healed up, and have your turrets traverse in a relatively good time. So that could be another build. Again, tailor builds for your style of play. Now, the one thing I did want to talk about when it came to cruisers is the Russian cruisers, all the way up to, basically from tier 6 all the way up to tier 9. And the reason why is because of the size of their guns. I mean, you pretty much have either 152mm or you have 180mm on the Donskoy. And on these particular ships, the captain builds, for example, IFHE becomes a very, very, very good skill, because with 152mm guns, without IFHE, you're able to penetrate 25mm of armor. So that means you are able to penetrate like tier 7 battleships and things like that. But once you meet tier 8 battleships and above, then they start to have pretty darn good bow armor, 32mm of it, and you're not going to be able to penetrate and do damage. However, if you get IFHE, you get 33mm of penetration with your high explosive. So all of a sudden, this skill becomes a lot more viable. And of course, if you're going to get the skill, you pretty much have to get Demo Expert to counteract that 3% loss of fire chance. So you get Demo Expert and you equip a fire flag. So that's one thing to sort of remind you all of, is if you're playing these lower tier cruisers, and it doesn't have to be just the Russian ones. I mean, if you talk about the German light cruisers, the US light cruisers, I mean, if they got 150 to 155, oh, the IJN one too, like the Mogami with the 155s, IFHE becomes a very, very viable build as well. So IFHE plus Demo Expert. So anyways, just diverging away from tier 10 for a little bit. And, oh, by the way, the Dmitry Donskoy as well. 180 millimeter main guns. That's normal HE pen's only 30 millimeters. So that's enough to go through all tier 7 battleship battles and stuff like that. But again, you run into the 32 millimeter battles of tier 8, 9, 10 battleships, you will struggle. So if you get IFHE on the Donskoy, you got 39 millimeters of pen, which allows you to do exactly that. So this skill, by the way, don't take on 203 millimeter or 220 millimeter heavy cruisers. It just doesn't work. It's not a good skill. They already have enough HE pen to go through the bows of battleships, with like the one exception I said is like the upper belt armor on US battleships and the upper belt armor of a Yamato, which, you know, again, there is some utility there, but it's not as good as compared to the utility that these 152 millimeter light cruisers get. Although, like I said earlier, you know, there is some utility there, but it's not really worth 4 points. Next up, let's talk about the Hindenburg. And the Hindenburg has quite a different sort of set of skills to choose. I guess on the first row you can go with Direction Center for Catapult Aircraft. That's quite straightforward. You get those two planes up there. They act as a nice amount of spotting for incoming torpedoes, and maybe even that destroyer if you get lucky. So that's useful. On the second row, I would say get Adrenaline Rush, just because, again, as a cruiser, people do have a tendency of shooting at you, and you do lose HP, and, you know, the more HP you lose, the faster your guns fire. Hindenburg's already got a pretty good rate of fire, but a little bit more doesn't hurt you. And then on the third row, you can get Demo Expert. You know, the Hindenburg's fire chance normally isn't all that great, so Demo Expert could help. Just give you a little bit more fires, making your HE a little bit more viable. So that is something to consider getting as well. And then on the fourth row, ooh, here's some choices here. Concealment Expert could be quite useful, I would say. You're able to get around without every battleship who sees you want to take a pot shot at you. I mean, you are kind of a big cruiser, so that is tempting. And with your remaining 9 points, you could get Vigilance. This plus, because this stacks with your Hydroacoustic Search, and this plus your Hydro means that you're going to be able to spot torpedoes from a very far distance, and that should allow you to actually help your team as well. Especially if you're going with them as a cruiser, you can offer them that anti-torpedo detection sort of support. So Vigilance can be quite useful, and with your remaining skill points, you could offer something like Advanced Firing Training, because German AA is already amazing, might as well make it a little bit better. Pack Advanced Firing Training, and with your 2 remaining points, you can get either things like Jack of all trades, and again, this is a skill that'll make your Hydro cool down a little bit faster. You could also opt for things like Expert Marksman, if that pleases you. Although, again, if you'd given up Advanced Firing Training, here we go. If you gave up AFT, you could get things potentially like Superintendent, get that extra heal. You know, the extra charge of Hydro, though that's not as useful, but the extra heal could be. You could have also opted for maybe, instead of taking AFT, just get Basic Firing Training and Superintendent. These two combo together could be quite good. Or you could, again, offer a little bit more survivability, right? So a Jack of all trades, High Alert plus Expert Marksman, right? So a lot of different choices. Or you could just get even 2 of the 1-point skills, maybe get Priority Target and get Incoming Fire Alert, just to give you a pretty accurate impression of when people are locked onto you and when people are firing at you. So Hindenburg, quite a few builds as well. And then finally, the Minotaur. Now, the Minotaur is very different because this is a light cruiser, really, really fragile, depends on its smoke a lot. Quite a different playstyle than when you're dealing with something like, you know, the Hindenburg, the Moskva, the Des Moines, or the Zao. So, Minotaur, what do you pick? Wow, there's a couple interesting choices here. I would say Priority Target could be an interesting one, just giving you a sense when somebody's locked onto you and are probably going to be shooting at you. That's one. 2, I would say Adrenaline Rush, just because Minotaur and a lot of the UK cruisers, you have a tendency of taking like massive amounts of Citadel damage, and if your HP drops a huge chunk, your rate of fire just goes up. So why the hell not, right? So get that. Now, do keep in mind that you are all of a sudden having to deal with the fact that your smoke clouds are very, very iffy. They puff like maybe 1, maybe, well, they do puff 1, but they puff maybe 2 if you're lucky. So you might want to consider bigger smokescreen, right? Just giving yourself that extra little bit of safety. So smokescreen expert could play a role here. You want to get vigilance, because when you are in smoke, torpedoes coming your way, you want that extra little bit of warning. No need for things like demo expert. You don't have any HE shells anyways. And then, of course, you want concealment expert, because stealth is awesome. All right, there we go. So I've picked the initial set of skills. Got 7 points left. What do I pick? And here you've got some interesting choices as well. Radio location, if you want to go anti-destroyer Royal Navy cruiser, which is a mean thing, because, you know, Royal Navy cruisers are mean against destroyers. So you can definitely pick this for 4 points. And with your 3 remaining points, you can go for something like superintendent, because extra heal, extra smoke, why not? So okay, you know, that's one way to build it. Another way to build it is to forego radio location and instead go for things like AA. So you can take things like, I mean, advanced firing training I think is better than manual fire control for AA armament, just because manual AA control for your manual fire control for your AA armament only affects your large caliber AA guns, and while they offer quite a punch still, the extra range combined with your smaller caliber AA guns, I mean, this could be quite a bit more useful. So again, that's sort of up to you. And of course, remember, manual does require you to control click the actual squadron in order to take effect, right? So you could go advanced firing training, but if you take that, you kind of give up radio location finding. So I mean, you could do this and then offer something like superintendent, right? That's kind of viable against aircraft, and you get those extra heal charges. You could also give up smokescreen expert as well. Give up smokescreen expert, give up superintendent, and take radio location finding, with 1 point left over for incoming fire alert. Maybe that could be a viable strategy as well. So again, you'll notice that, you know, the Minotaur builds are quite varied as well. Anyways, I'm hoping that after all this, and mind you, I've only covered destroyers and cruisers, and I'm going to basically put battleships and carriers in a separate video, that, you know, you're starting to get an impression of what the skill tree really is all about, that there's a lot of different builds depending on your playstyle and your role that you want to play. Along with, of course, the fact that if you combine with division mates, that you can create some pretty interesting, nifty combinations there as well. So anyways, that's really all I have time for today. I think this video is approaching an hour long, which is one of the longest videos I think I've ever made. So, you know, thank you for watching, and of course, stay tuned for part 2, which is going to be battleships and carriers. And if you got any questions about builds and stuff like that, ask those in the comment section below, and I'll try my best to get to them. Anyways, folks, take care, have a good one, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all in part 2.